Hello, this is Jane, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the April 23rd issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Yesterday was Earth Day, and on the front page, there's a big headline that says a growth opportunity. Young volunteers dig in at tree planting event to mark Earth Day, and it shows two young boys, one with a shovel, both with shovels, digging a hole so they can plant a tree. And there's no article that accompanies this, but there is a line under it that says about 200 people gathered to plant native trees and shrubs at Scarborough's McGowan District Park on Wednesday. All right, so the first article is going to be under the byline of Queen's Park. NDP calls for probe into jet purchase. Ford says $28.9 million plane has been sold back to Bombardier. And this is by Robert Benzie. As Premier Doug Ford announces his $28.9 million executive jet has been returned to Bombardier, NDP leader Marit Stiles has asked the Auditor General to probe the controversial transaction. Ford said Wednesday the 2016 Challenger 650, purchased by the Ontario government last week, has already been sold back to the manufacturer. I can announce we sold the plane for the same price right back to Bombardier, the Premier told journalist Laura Stone on stage at a conference at the Fairmont Royal York. The Star revealed Friday the province had taken possession last week of the used Quebec-made 12-passenger jet purchased through Bombardier. But with critics quickly deriding it as a gravy plane, a play on Ford's boast that he was elected to stop the gravy train of government spending, the Premier flip-flopped on Sunday and said it would be sold. Still, he sounded regretful about the U-turn at the Royal York. It's bad communications, Ford told Stone before an audience of about 700 people at the Globe and Mail Intersect conference. We have no plane now, folks. I'm done. It's done. I'm flying commercial or will fly on a little puddle jumper that the OPP has, he said, noting the jet would have served other purposes beyond his official travel. It was flying firefighters up north. It was for Ontario Corp. It was for OPP when they have to set a tactical team up. And it was a multi-ministerial plane, Ministry of Natural Resources, and so on and so forth. Louise Solomita, a spokesperson for the Montreal-based aerospace giant, confirmed Bombardier had purchased the aircraft back, adding the firm has a rich history in the province of Ontario, where we employ more than 2,000 people at our aircraft assembly facility at Pearson Airport. Ford promised there would be a full accounting of any costs incurred during the purchase, which was unanimously approved by Cabinet earlier this year. Compounding pressure on the Premier to disclose details of the deal, the NDP's Stiles formally requested that Auditor General Shelley Spence undertake a comprehensive audit and investigation into the Government of Ontario's recent purchase and subsequent resale of a private aircraft. There are serious and growing concerns about the financial stewardship, transparency, and overall value for money associated with this transaction, wrote Stiles in a letter that has been received by Spence. Ontarians deserve a clear and independent accounting of how public funds have been used in this matter, including but not limited to total acquisition cost, operating and maintenance expenses, resale value, any financial losses arising from the existing contracts, purchase, outfitting, and reselling of the government's recently purchased private jet to ultimately be borne by taxpayers, Stiles continued. Transparency and accountability are cornerstones of public trust. The premier said that the purchase of a private plane was a mistake, indicating public funds were improperly spent, she wrote. An independent audit by your office would provide Ontarians with the clarity they deserve and help ensure that lessons are learned to prevent any similar concerns in the future. At Queen's Park, Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy said he was not aware of any brokerage or other fees involved in the sale and maintained that any cost incurred would be de minimis, a Latin term that means lacking significance or importance. But the plane was not mentioned in Bethlenfalvy's record $244.2 billion budget on March 26, which projected a $13.8 billion deficit, the largest shortfall since the height of the COVID-19 pandemic 6 years ago. Interim Liberal leader John Fraser said the jet may be sold, but the premier remains responsible for the debacle. He owns the decision to buy a luxury jet. He bought a luxury jet when people can't afford groceries, rent, and gas. It's part of his legacy. When trying to justify the scheme, Ford's progressive conservatives pointed out Prime Minister Mark Carney recently spent $753 million on 6 larger Bombardier Global 6500 jets, which are made in Ontario, and Quebec bought 3 Challengers for $107 million. And the next article is under the title of World Cup 2026. City scraps plan to charge $10 for FanFest tickets. Move leaves $5 million budget hole. And this is by Ben Spur. Toronto's main FIFA World Cup party will be free for most attendees after council voted to scrap a contentious last-minute proposal to charge admission. But the decision not to sell tickets for the fan festival will leave a $5 million gap in the event's budget. And with less than 2 months to go, it's not clear how the city will find that money. Officials hope to make up the shortfall through sponsorships and other revenue, and by reallocating money from within the approved $380 million hosting budget that Mayor Olivia Chow has vowed won't be exceeded. However, staff told council they are already falling short of their sponsorship targets on other aspects of the game. It's tight, there's no doubt about it, and it is sort of last minute. Councilman Michael Thompson at Scarborough Center told reporters at City Hall. While he still believes the World Cup will benefit the city, Thompson, who was tapped by Chow to raise funds for other elements of the tournament, acknowledged that making up the foregone ticket revenue this late could be difficult. We have about 50 days, and we have some additional work to do. I do have some phone calls to make from potential sponsors to see if they would be so inclined to contribute to help us, he said. The executive director of the city's World Cup Secretariat, Sharon Bolenbach, told reporters there's a number of ways Toronto can come up with the funding, including the sale of merchandise and hospitality packages. Those are all opportunities for us to bring revenue into the event, and we're working hard on that, she said. Toronto is planning to hold the FanFest at Fort York and the Bentway over 22 days of the International Soccer Tournament, which runs from June 11 to July 19. The city is hosting 6 matches for the World Cup in partnership with 15 other venues across the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. The festival is a key part of the city's hosting plans and is expected to feature broadcasts of matches as well as live performances, art installations, and a wide variety of local food experiences, according to the city. Chow and other officials had promised it would be a no-cost way for residents who can't afford match tickets, which are selling for thousands of dollars, to take part in the World Cup. But at Chow's executive committee last week, staff presented a surprise plan to charge a $10 entry fee. VIP tickets would be sold for between $100 and $300. Staff said ticketing was necessary for crowd control and safety reasons, but also cited rising costs related to additional event activities at the festival. Together, the changes were expected to cost $9 million more than the $16 million FanFest contract the city awarded to a private vendor group just 4 months ago, bringing the cost to roughly $25 million. After some councilors and residents objected, Chow moved a motion at her executive committee asking staff to make general admission free. In response, staff issued a report Wednesday that would allow just under 80% of daily attendees to the 20,000 capacity event to enter at no cost. Roughly 20% of tickets, or 3,900 a day, would still be sold as premium access, while about 500 a day would go to community groups at no cost. The earlier plan would have relied on ticket sales to make up about $6.2 million of the $9 million in new FanFest costs, with the rest coming from reallocations within the city's hosting budget and a $900,000 contribution from FIFA. Under the revised proposal, there will be only about $3 million in ticket revenue from VIP passes. Staff are still developing a reservation system to help manage attendance, but there will be no fees to the public. Council approved the revised plan Wednesday in a vote of 18-3. Some council members say the plan raises questions about tournament spending. Although the report on FanFest states the new costs go above and beyond the $380 million hosting envelope, staff have argued that doesn't represent a budget increase because the additional spending will be offset by new revenue. According to Councilman Bradford, that math does not add up. The Beach's East York councilor, who plans to run for mayor this year, said while he supports keeping FanFest free, the plan to fund it has a lot of holes, and staff had been left scrambling to plug the gaps. He blamed Chow for not stepping in earlier to stop the ticketing proposal. Councilor Alejandra Bravo from Davenport, an ally of the mayor, pointed out Toronto agreed to host the World Cup in 2018, 5 years before Chow was elected. She asserted that the mayor has been relentlessly working to manage the tournament and accused Bradford of, quote, performing, unquote, for his own political aims. I think the criticisms are really unfair, Bravo said. The city is contributing about $180 million to Toronto's World Cup hosting costs, while the federal government has pledged $104 million and the province is kicking in $97 million. And before I go on to the next article, I need to stop and remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the next article is titled, it's under the byline of police, and it is titled, Top Homicide Cop Says Anti-Semitism, Racism Helped Spur His Exit. Idzinga memoir cites leadership failures during 34-year career on Toronto force. And this article is by Jennifer Pagliaro. Longtime homicide investigator and former unit commander Hank Idsinga says internal anti-Semitism, racism, and a lack of leadership led to his decision to leave Toronto Police after a storied career. He's no whistleblower, Idsinga insists, as he sits across from a reporter in a West End restaurant to discuss his upcoming memoir, The High Road: Confessions of a Homicide Cop. This was all part of his story. After 34 years on the force, that story is also full of bad guys, a serial killer among them, grieving families, and a unit of detectives he says he was proud to lead. Besides, he says he doesn't think anyone at the service will be surprised by what he has to say. What they do about it is another thing. Is it going to make them say, okay, what can we do to make this better? How do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? Great. I'm all for that. But other than that, it's a memoir. Here's what I dealt with. Make what you will of it. In December 2020, having spent over 3 decades on the force, 18 of those on the homicide squad, 5 in charge of it, Idsinga walked into the elevator at Toronto Police Headquarters at 40 College Street to go to a meeting where he and his team would be presenting to a lawyer. A senior officer he knew got in the elevator with him. I can't believe we have to pander to this effing Jew, the officer said to Idsinga. The elevator doors opened. This wasn't the first time the seasoned investigator had heard this officer spout anti-Semitic comments. He'd previously heard them refer to a kosher barbecue as a Jew-Q, he wrote in the book. He tried to chalk it up to a bad attempt at a joke. The same senior officer, during an earlier encounter, had been watching a good news video story on the service's intranet when he stopped Idsinga and said the only reason he gets away with this is because he's a effing Jew. Idsinga was bewildered. Wasn't it a good news story? Okay, this is under a byline that says Prisoner 27449. Few people knew Idsinga himself is Jewish. In looks and name, he took after his father's side of Dutch farmers. To see Idsinga is to look up to him literally. At well over 6 feet, with boxy shoulders and a square jaw, he cut an imposing figure at crime scenes and press conferences. All that's changed since his retirement at age 58 is a coiffed mop of hair. Gone are the days when he would shave his own head. There was never enough time to stop for a haircut before addressing the media on the latest murder case. In a chapter titled Prisoner 27449, Idsinga pieces together what is known about the life of his grandfather, a Jewish man named Arthur Jacobs, whom he never met. Like any investigation, he pulls together the missing pieces of his own heritage, the facts as they are known. Jacob's story ends on January 26, 1942, in a gas chamber inside an Austrian castle converted by the Nazis. He had spent 8 years imprisoned and transferred to various concentration camps, including the notorious Dachau. In a lot of ways, this is where Idsinga's story begins, he writes, his family's history inspiring his desire to become one of the good guys. The next byline here says, an iron curtain. Back inside the meeting at police headquarters, Idsinga kept his distance, choosing a seat on the opposite side of the room. He recalls feeling sick to his stomach. It's like, what do? He said of his reaction. You're crossing boundaries you simply can't cross in that culture. Still, he'd had enough. He approached one of the service's deputy chiefs. He didn't tell them the specifics. He said he'd follow the chain of command, but other than that, he wanted nothing to do with this senior officer. His work life after that, he wrote, became, quote, very difficult, end quote. I was routinely excluded from meetings and decisions, he wrote. His detectives would hit roadblocks with senior command. He told them to keep their heads down and ignore the politics. He declared an iron curtain between his squad and senior officers. You get gaslit and you become the problem child, and it affects everybody in homicide because suddenly the squad is a bit of a pariah because I was running it, he said. Still, their team was hitting record high clearance rates, the number of suspects arrested for murders versus those that are unsolved, with 82 to 85% of cases solved. It wasn't only anti-Semitism. Idsinga also witnessed several instances of anti-black racism. A black colleague who was late for work because he was profiled and stopped by police on his way in. A superintendent who summoned black officers to his office to reprimand them for insignificant perceived slights. A brilliant black and indigenous investigator who did speak out, including about the racism he saw on the force, then faced that same superintendent during his promotional interview. He did not make the cut. Idsinga, who wore his grandfather's prisoner number engraved on his cufflinks, wrote, "It was a disgrace." Toronto Police spokesperson Stephanie Sayer said the Professional Standards Unit has reached out to Idsinga for the purpose of investigating his very serious claims. There are clear, established channels for police members to report concerns, Sayer said, but Idsinga chose not to use them during his time with the service. It's unfortunate that in retirement, Mr. Idsinga has chosen to make claims that will undermine public trust in policing, Sayer added. And the next byline here says, a failure of supervision. I heard you're a rat, the officer said as he slammed Idsinga up against one of the lockers inside downtown's 14 Division. Less than 24 hours earlier, Idsinga, then a young beat cop just 5 years out of the police college, was getting ready to hit the road with his partner. Idsinga has noticed this officer, his senior, whom he gives the alias John, would show up reeking of garlic. He later learned by talking to others that garlic was used to mask the smell of alcohol. Vodka was John's choice of drink. Until this day, John had never wanted to drive, as Idsinga tells it, but this particular afternoon shift, another officer told Idsinga that John was really hammered. When he made his way out to their assigned car, John was behind the wheel. What happens next would set the stage for Idsinga's time on the force. The partners headed to a local second cup, often their first stop. John almost hit several cars on the way there, Idsinga said. Inside the coffee shop, Idsinga remembers the barista looked between the two cops, whom he knew as regulars, quizzically. Just then they were assigned to a call. Back outside the shop, Idsinga said he asked John for the keys. He offered to drive him home, told him to book off sick. When John protested, Idsinga radioed they were off the call and drove them back to the station. Their staff sergeant, hearing they canceled the call, was waiting for them. John was eventually suspended and would work the rest of his career at a desk, but Idsinga said other officers, including their supervisors, had known John had a problem and should never have let them leave the lot. After being confronted in the locker room by his peer, Idsinga knew he had a problem. My career is going nowhere fast. Right at the beginning, he told a reporter. He sees it now as a failure of supervision. They had simply fallen into the trap of keeping their heads down and avoiding their supervisory responsibilities, he wrote in his memoir. When interviewing alleged murderers for the first time, Idsinga wrote he would often tell them they were about to see a lot of each other and that he would always say hello to them in court each morning when the time came. Wait a minute, Okay, I'm reading this online and I missed a short paragraph here, and this is under the byline of no regrets. Idsinga said he didn't want to name names in the book. Many from the constable who called him a rat to the senior officer who spouted hatred remain anonymous in his pages. It's not Idsinga's style to get personal. When interviewing alleged murderers for the first time, Idsinga wrote he would often tell them they were about to see a lot of each other and that he would always say hello to them in court each morning when the time came. Most said hello back. Idsinga said he has no regrets about his career, but the book leaves a burning question. What would he tell a hopeful new recruit looking to join Toronto's service today? I would say, do yourself a favor and read my book, he said with a wry smile, because you're going to be sitting for 6 hours with a dead body that's been decaying for 2 to 3 weeks as you wait for the coroner, right? You're going to be dealing with shootings. You're going to be dealing with people who don't like you just because of the uniform that you are wearing. There's all sorts of pitfalls you're going to be dealing with. Instructors at a police college who are complete dicks. There's a lot of people in ranks that don't deserve to be in those ranks, but there's a lot of great people in the ranks that you can learn a lot from. Be aware of what you're getting yourself into. Where there are failures in society, he points out, the force has never been exempt. Anti-Semitism, racism, and misogyny. The difference, he said, is that it's up to the police service to have those checks and balances in place to make sure that some of these personal biases don't affect how they do their job. And sometimes we fail at that. Okay, the next article is titled Air Canada Plane Avoids Collision at New York Airport. This is by Alicia Wang. An Air Canada Express flight recently experienced a near miss with another plane as it was landing at New York City's John F. Kennedy International Airport this week. The incident occurred just after 2:30 p.m. on Monday. Republic Airways Flight 4464, which was arriving from Indianapolis, Indiana, was approaching JFK when it missed its intended approach path and flew too close to Jazz Aviation Flight 8554, which was flying from Pearson and had been cleared to land on a parallel runway. Upon approaching, Flight 8554 received a traffic warning notification and resolution from Air Traffic Control, Jazz Aviation said. The crew followed instructions to perform a go-around before landing at JFK, they said. Safety is our top priority, and our crews are well trained to deal with many operational situations such as this, they added. According to the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, the Republic Airways flight performed a go-around operation. This operation discontinues the intended landing approach and returns the plane to a higher altitude to position for another attempt, according to the agency. Audio recordings from within the Air Traffic Control Center, according to Good Morning America, reveals the Republic Airways flight was instructed to correct immediately, given the closeness of their plane to the Jazz flight. Records of the flights from the FlightAware website indicate that both landed at the airport shortly after, with the Jazz flight landing at 2:49 p.m. and the Republic Airways flight landing at 2:54 that afternoon. Republic Airways is a regional airline with headquarters in Indiana. The near miss is about a month after the collision between an Air Canada Express flight and a firefighting vehicle at LaGuardia Airport, leaving the plane's two two pilots dead. And before I continue, I want to just pause here and remind you that you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the next article is titled, Council Okays Jet Ski Ban on 3 Beaches. Officials blame some vendors for rise in unsafe behavior along the waterfront. Toronto is looking to ban jet skis from several beaches this summer in response to what city staff have described in reports as a growing risk to public safety posed by the boats. Council voted Wednesday on a plan to rid the vessels from Marie Curtis Park, Humber Bay Park East, and Bluffers Park, pending consent from the federal government. These will be demarcated with large buoys the city hopes the Port Authority will pay to install and maintain. The chief of police is also being asked to craft a multi-year strategy to further enhance boating and water safety enforcement. Mayor Olivia Chow, an avid kayaker, said this is necessary because jet skis pose a danger to beachgoers, and she's seen paddleboarders capsized by motorboats. Staff say the vessels conflict with Toronto's objective of being a paddle-friendly city and do not mix well with swimmers and non-motorized users. They can also be dangerous to their operators. Staff note at least 4 jet skiers have been hospitalized since 2023, and 2 have died since 2019. Alan Love, Staff Sergeant with the Toronto Police Marine Unit, told the Mayor's Executive Committee earlier this month that officers issued more than 3,000 tickets and warnings to motorboaters from May to September last year. Officials blame unscrupulous jet ski vendors for a steady rise in unsafe behavior on the water year after year. Growing demand for personal watercraft in the city spawned a black market where unpermitted rental businesses offering substandard safety training and equipment have become ubiquitous along the waterfront. Industry experts told the Star they believe the man who drowned last summer after falling off a jet ski likely rented the vessel from one such operation, owing to the fact that the company appeared to have allowed him to break standard safety rules and boat after dark without a life jacket. The consequences of these activities have been very real, said Councillor Bradford Beaches in East York, whose ward includes Woodbine Beach, which he said has been marred by illegal jet ski activity for years. Swimmers and paddlers are being pushed out of the water. Near misses happen on a daily basis. There's a growing sense that the rules here are not being enforced. In addition to exclusion zones, the city will also look at whether it can carve out space along the waterfront where compliant jet ski rental businesses can operate starting summer 2027. These places would need to be located away from designated swimming beaches and areas predominantly used by small sailboats, canoes, kayaks, and paddleboards. And the next article is titled Ontario to Limit Foreign Ownership of Farmland. Several provinces already control agricultural lands, and this is by Maura Welsh. The Ford government is introducing legislation to limit foreign ownership of farmland, Ontario's agriculture minister said Wednesday. Trevor Jones says the Protecting Ontario's Food Independence Act is a proactive measure to block foreign buyers from owning large tracts of land that could potentially be left to lie fallow or produce crops that are sent overseas. Food security truly is national security to ensure Ontario's farmland is never just a number on some overseas company's balance sheet, Jones told a news conference. The exact limits on foreign ownership of agricultural land have not been yet determined. Jones said those details will be worked out in consultation with representatives of the agricultural sector. The legislation also highlights a push for agricultural development in the clay belt along the Ontario and Quebec border, although Jones noted that land is not as rich as the Type 1 farmland found in southern Ontario. It will also merge other food-related acts, such as those governing the Ontario Food Terminal and licensing fees in the beef cattle industry. In 2024, the agri-food sector contributed $52 billion to Ontario's gross domestic product and generated more than $28 billion in international exports, the government said. Limits on foreign ownership of agricultural land already exist in Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Prince Edward Island, and Quebec, according to the Agriculture Ministry. This is not a novel idea, Jones said. Heaven forbid that someone takes land, banks it, and lets it sit there for an infinity. To me, the land should be producing actively. The government also plans to seek better data on non-Canadian ownership of agricultural land in Ontario. Farmland in southern Ontario is considered among the best in the province, which creates conflict between those who want to build housing in the highly populated Toronto region and others who want to preserve the land for agricultural use, said Brady Deaton, a professor at the University of Guelph's Department of Food, Agriculture, and Resource Economics. This is always going to be on in urban areas, he said. We have this tension between preservation and change driven by the uniqueness of Ontario in terms of the population density. Still, he said, Ontario needs better data on ownership. Deaton said the United States Department of Agriculture, that's the USDA, publishes detailed information on farmland and forests that fall under foreign ownership. The majority of those international owners are Canadian, he noted. According to a 2024 USDA report, foreign investors held an interest in roughly 46 million acres, or 3.6% of that country's forests and farmland. Canadian investors owned the most at 34%. That's 16.1 million acres, followed by investors from the Netherlands, Germany, and the United Kingdom. The next article comes under the byline of trade. U.S. can't dictate terms, Carney says. LeBlanc says Ottawa has already met some of Washington's demands ahead of CUSMA talks. And this is by Tonda McCharles and Robert Benzie. Ottawa. The Liberal government says it will not offer new concessions before getting to the Canada-U.S. trade table, with Prime Minister Mark Carney declaring the United States cannot dictate the terms of what must be discussed. Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc said Wednesday that Ottawa has already met some U.S. demands for concessions and will deal with others, but only in the context of a broader deal to resolve each country's respective concerns. We're not going to make a series of concessions or agree to a series of things that aren't in the interest of the Canadian economy, Canadian businesses, Canadian workers, just to get to a table and have a statement appear on a website in the United States to then receive a whole second list of things that they're going to want, said LeBlanc. Appearing remotely At the Globe and Mail Intersect conference, LeBlanc said Ottawa is prepared to deal with the list of irritants between Canada and the U.S., and we're happy to sit down and go through that with them. But it's got to be part of a larger, more comprehensive arrangement. Carney, on his way into a caucus meeting, said Canada and the U.S. each have demands as the decision to review or renew the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade deal looms. It's a negotiation, he said. Radio Canada, quoting unnamed sources, reported Wednesday the U.S. is making demands akin to an entry fee in order to get to the negotiating table. The Prime Minister did not dispute that characterization, but dismissed the notion and suggested the talks must be a give and take. In French, Carney said, it's not the case that there's one demander and another supplicant. And in English, he added, it's not a case of the United States dictates the terms. We have a negotiation. We can come to a mutually successful outcome. It will take some time. Canada has made some counter proposals as well, which the Americans, are aware of. He said, but Carney emphasized issues should be examined at a negotiating table, not ahead of time. Meanwhile, in Washington, two top officials in Trump's administration expressed ongoing frustration Wednesday with Canada. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said it is insulting and disrespectful for Canada to keep American wine and spirits off provincial government-controlled liquor store shelves, which prompted a Democratic senator to accuse Lutnick of insulting Canadians and exacerbating tensions. Over at the Congressional Ways and Means Committee, U.S. Trade Rep. Jamieson Greer said the Canadian government refuses to address repeated American demands that more U.S. dairy products be given access to Canadian markets, and shrugs off its concerns about U.S. alcohol sales being curtailed. Canadians are happy to talk to us about adjustments to USMCA and different things like that, but they have made no commitments on dairy, he said, nor on U.S. alcohol sales, with Canada claiming its provincial jurisdiction. We're kind of at the end of our rope and just asking for them to do this. Think about this, right? There are two countries that have retaliated economically against the United States in the past year, the People's Republic of China and Canada. So that's kind of the company that they're running in, Greer said, adding, there may have to be an enforcement action to deal with the ban on alcohol sales without specifying what the U.S. would do. At the Globe Conference in Toronto, Premier Doug Ford, who has banned U.S. wine and spirits from LCBO shelves for more than a year in retaliation for Trump's tariffs, stressed that prohibition will remain until the American levies are gone. Well, I do it in the heartbeat, folks, but when he's destroying our auto sector, putting in jeopardy tens of thousands of jobs, and going after our steel sector, aluminum sector, our lumber sector, our dairy sector, and he expects us to sit back and roll over? The premier said, blasting Trump, you never roll over to a bully. You confront them head on. The LCBO, that's one tool. We have to wait until the USMCA is renewed. I'm sorry, folks, I don't trust President Trump, he said, adding, Canada should not pay any entry fee for trade talks, and implored people to rally behind Carney. LeBlanc, for his part, said the Americans have made clear global tariffs on steel, aluminum, autos, and other sectors will not be completely lifted. They say the sectoral tariffs to some extent will remain in place. We should be realistic. They have not taken anybody to zero, made a deal that takes those tariffs to zero, he said. But there could be significant reductions in, for example, the 50% levy on steel and aluminum. Those had almost been resolved when the two countries were exchanging term sheets on a deal in October, before the U.S. suspended talks after Trump complained about Ford's Ontario government ad blitz with 1987 video of former President Ronald Reagan warning against tariffs. Carney and LeBlanc were echoing comments made a day earlier by Canada's lead trade negotiator, Janice Charette, who listed significant concessions Canada has already made, lifting most of its counter tariffs against the U.S., dropping the digital services tax, and spending heavily to enhance border security. LeBlanc said elimination of the digital services tax was not only abolished, the money was reimbursed with interest to American companies, some of whom had already charged that to their customers, their clients. So check the box, that's done. They wanted the retaliatory tariffs lifted. That was also done. So at one point, there's an obligation for all of us to sit down, we think, recommit quickly to a trilateral arrangement which is in the economic interest of all three countries. And I need to pause one last time to remind you, you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article is titled Liberals Move to Reset Committees. Motion gives party more power to push through legislation. This is by Ryan Tamilty and Reza Patel. Ottawa. The Liberals are flexing their majority muscle to change House of Commons committees, giving themselves more seats and the power to shut down investigations and push legislation through Parliament. Government House Leader Stephen McKinnon introduced a motion in the Commons on Wednesday to boost the number of MPs on most committees to 12, with the Liberals getting 7 seats, the Conservatives 4, and the Bloc Québécois 1. The current 10-member makeup of the legislative committees, 5 Liberals, 4 Conservatives, and 1 Bloc, gives the opposition the majority of votes because committee chairs only vote in cases of a tie. McKinnon said, with the government's new majority standing, it is time for the committee rosters to change. He said the government wants committees to study legislation and make changes, but it is tired of partisanship that slows legislation. We do not want to play silly partisan games that waste the time and the money of taxpayers in this place. We want to work together to achieve big things for the Canadians we all represent, he said outside the House of Commons chamber. He said it only makes sense for the government that holds a majority of seats in Parliament have a majority of seats on committees. Our democracy is built on the pillars of the House of Commons being reflected in all of the institutions of Parliament and notably House committees, he said. Committees in Parliament study legislation and can summon witnesses and request documents in investigations of the government. Most recently, opposition members demanded Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne appear before a committee to speak to a possible conflict of interest over his partner's employment with the high-speed rail agency ALTO. Liberal members of that committee filibustered for days to prevent a vote on summoning Champagne before they finally relented. McKinnon said the Liberal filibuster was not a silly partisan game because the opposition was simply trying to attack Champagne. This felt like a deeply partisan and vexatious series of attacks on the finance minister that were completely unwarranted, he said. The Liberals secured a majority government this month after MP Marilyn Gladu crossed the floor from the Conservatives and Liberal candidates won in 3 by-elections. Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer said the government had seized the majority through floor crossings and was giving itself power that voters had denied it in last year's general election. The very first thing this Liberal government has done is to make life easier for themselves, to avoid scrutiny on their legislation and to avoid transparency on their decisions, he said. The changes are slightly different on 4 committees which provide oversight: ethics, public accounts, government operations, and status of women. They currently have 9 members, 4 from the government, 5 from the opposition. The government will gain 1 MP on each, giving it 5 to the opposition's combined 5. That will effectively give the government majorities because the chairs, who are usually opposition MPs, only vote in the case of a tie. Scheer said the Tories would offer an amendment to McKinnon's motion to have the oversight committees maintain a clear majority of opposition members as a basic symbol of transparency. These are important committees where the opposition does the work on behalf of Canadian taxpayers and voters to shine a light, to go through line-by-line spending, to find out who got contracts and how decisions were made, he said. Scheer said those committees played central roles in investigating past Liberal scandals and should be left alone. The only reason to stack the deck on these oversight committees is so that the government can sweep these types of investigations under the rug, he charged. In a statement late Wednesday afternoon, McKinnon rejected the Conservative amendment, saying all committees should reflect the new composition of Parliament. There are not 2 tiers of committees in Parliament. They are all the same, and the principle applies to them equally, he said. Scheer's view did not appear unanimous within his own party. On Wednesday, Conservative MP Greg McLean suggested that McKinnon's move is within bounds. Asked what he made of claims the Liberals were contravening parliamentary tradition, McLean said they were disputes over technicalities. The way Parliament runs seems to change all the time here. Well, the rules of the committee. We'll see what happens, McLean said. BC Conservative MP Bob Zimmer said it would be a normal for a majority government to have more seats on a committee than the opposition, but called the Liberals' success in courting floor crossers, stacking the deck in their favor. It's unclear when the government will bring McKinnon's motion for a vote, as the 3 MPs who won this month's by-elections have not yet taken their seats in Parliament. The next article is Leslieville Stench, the talk of town. The town. Residents share theories on what's behind the rotten smell. This is by Mark Coley. Something is rotten in the neighborhood of Leslieville. More specifically, something smells rotten. Although, to be clear, rotten isn't quite the right word either. Fecal might be a better fit, like a clogged toilet that's been left there for a week. Local resident Dylan Soyne explained. Rotten eggs, Maria Petrovic said. A decomposing rat or a body, per Gillian Parr. And while the smell wafting over these east side streets was particularly bad Wednesday, it happens so often that Victoria Days has a name for it, the Leslieville Stench. Ask the residents around Jones, Greenwood, and Coxwell Avenues, or better yet, take a stroll yourself along Queen Street East and just wait for the wind to change. It is a pungent, noxious, distinctly intestinal scent, an inescapable and undeniably unpleasant infection of the sinuses. It comes around most often in the spring as the weather warms, although some say it's worse on hot summer days. But where exactly is the smell coming from? Everyone has a theory. Most believe the blame lies with the nearby Ashbridges Bay wastewater treatment plant, one of the largest and oldest of its kind in Canada. Others wonder if it's a nearby garage site or Ontario line construction gone wrong, or spring fertilizer. I am almost certain it's manure, Day said of Wednesday's stench, which a handful of clients at the barber shop she works at complained about. As someone who has grown up around farms, that is cows. It is 100% cow S dash dash dash. Judy Clark is adamant that it is not. She manages the East End Garden Center and has lived in the area for 4 decades. The stench returns every year, Clark said, and people have tried to pin it on her manure pile in the past. She's not having it. It's the wastewater plant, she says. You just have to work through it. Put a mask on and work through it, Clark said. You can't do anything. Customers complain to her all the time about it, and likewise across the street for Grace Lee, who owns Maru, a Japanese restaurant. She said she smells it every day, from the early morning until 5 or 6 p.m. People ask to eat on the patio. They quickly learn they made the wrong choice. They just quickly finish their meal, she said, then run away. Locals have their strategies to endure the stinkiest of days. I try not to hang out outside in this neighborhood, Soin said. I just try to not breathe, said Dawa Dawa, a manager of Lambo's Deli. For its part, the city said crews are working to fix a mechanical issue at the Ashbridges Bay treatment plant that caused Wednesday's odor, but couldn't determine in time for the deadline why this has been a recurring problem for years. We're aware that some residents may be experiencing unpleasant odors, Toronto Water Deputy General Manager William Ferrandez wrote in an emailed statement. We appreciate the community's patience. The city completed an air management strategy for the Ashbridges Bay plant in 2007, later installing odor control systems to minimize the stench. But in 2024, the most recent year data is available. The plant received 18 odor complaints, the most in a single year since at least 2019. For 6 of the complaints, the plant says it investigated, and no possible source of odor was identified. For many locals, it is a point of frustration. For others, it is simply a fact of life. Day still loves walking to work. She has smelled worse. The stench, she said, is part of the Leslieville charm. And I need to finish here by reminding you that you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 23 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Jane. Thank you for listening.